There everyone, and welcome to a video on an introduction to functions. So functions are the last kind of big classic intro to computer science topic we will talk about in the class. Once we are done with these, we will have an exam and then move on to data analysis with Python. So this is sort of the last big kind of classic topic that we'll cover. I should say up front, students often have trouble acclimating to this topic. It is a non-trivial, it's not an easy thing to get used to. So like anything else in the class, like lists or loops or whatever, you have to be willing to practice with it for a while. And the practice involves sort of conceptually getting used to the topic and also Python's exact syntax. So just fair warning, often students find this material challenging, but I'm hoping we will go at a pace where by the time the exam rolls around, if not earlier, you will be comfortable with them and see their usefulness and so on. So the point of this video is to show you an introduction to functions. So we're going to spend, I don't know, 2 weeks on functions, something like that. So this is an intro, but not the end for sure. So just let me start with a high-level overview of what functions are and why you would use them. The high-level explanation of functions is that they let you separate a program into little pieces, and then the overall program is built up from those pieces. It's like building a piece of furniture from IKEA or something. So the functions are like the little sub-pieces that when you put them all together allow you to say, oh, I've built this big, impressive thing. They also streamline code, things like that. So oftentimes, if you don't use functions, you'll find yourself just copying and pasting code all over the place. Functions let you write code once and then kind of bank them so that you can just call on the code when you need it. So they sort of streamline programs like that. So when you first start using functions, they seem completely useless and dumb, and they take some getting used to. So it's worth saying up front why you would use this, and hopefully, 2 weeks from now or by the end of the course, you will see their usefulness and all their glory or something. But, up front, the examples I'm going to show you are sort of baby intro examples that aren't particularly interesting. So I just want to, before I show you some examples where you say, why would I do that? Let me give you an overview of why you would use them. So basically creating a new function gives you an opportunity to sort of give a name to a chunk of code. And once that chunk of code has a name, you can call on it whenever you want. It makes debugging the program easier, things like that. Programs are much easier to read when you have functions because you've kind of segmented out the code into its component pieces. Functions make programs much smaller. Anytime you find yourself repeating code, there's probably a function calling out to you to be used. And so then you just take the code you want to repeat, put it in one place, give it a name, and then call on it when you need it. When you have your program divvied up into functions, it makes debugging way easier. So if there's an error in your code and you're trying to hunt it down, having functions makes it much easier because you can just test out the functions individually and see if there's an issue with one of the parts. And well-designed functions are often reused by people. So like when I share code with my collaborators, often they're just sending me functions and I just plug them into my pre-existing code and go from there. So it really is, when you first see functions, again, just fair warning, when you first see them, you're going to think to yourself, why would I do that? Seems kind of silly. You might think that to yourself. And so let me just emphasize up front, it is impossible to write real code nowadays without functions. So hopefully you will agree with this by the end of the course, but keep this in mind when I show you these intro examples. It's just an intro, getting our feet wet. Okay, so of course, since this is an intro video, I'm trying to keep it short. I'm not going to cover more than a handful of functions, and you probably wouldn't use them very often, but at least for now we can see how functions are set up, and don't focus on how kind of trivial the functions are. Like don't focus on the fact that you probably wouldn't write functions like this. Okay, so before I hop over to the code, here's the basic syntax. DEF says I'm going to define a function now. That's how Python knows you're going to build a function. You give each function a name, just like you give lists, other variables names. You can feed things into the function. So you can feed in a phrase, you can feed in a number, you can feed in a list, whatever. Feed in whatever. And then you put some code in there. And the way this works is, since you gave the function a name in the main part of the program, you can just call on this function whenever you want, and whenever you do that, this code will run. So it's like you're holding code in reserve to be used whenever you feel like using it. Okay, so let me show you how that works. Hop on over to the notebook. So I have these preloaded. I can't guarantee they're error-free. We might fix some errors along the way, but again, if you want to type this along yourself, you should do that. So here's a first example. So def, I gave this function the name printHello. I gave it no inputs, so you don't have to feed things into functions if you don't feel like. And then here's some code. It prints hello. So when Python reads these two lines, Python thinks to itself, if it could think, oh, I see. They created a function. It's called printHello. Whenever in the main part of the program they use this, I'll know what to do. I'll just run this code right here. So when you first run this program, Python is still reading from top to bottom, but it just reads this and it like banks it. It knows you've named something and it knows you can use it if you want, but you don't have to. So if I comment this out and I run the cell, see like it's not printing anything. It's because I didn't call on the function. The way you call on a function is by invoking its name like this. So printHello, when I write that command, Python knows to do the following. It knows to be like, oh, okay, I recognize this name. It's right there. So Python like hops back up to the top of the program, hunts down this function name, and then executes this code like this. So here's our first function. Not particularly exciting. What it's designed to do is print hello. And it's designed to do that whenever you use the name printHello. And like literally whatever code you put in here, whatever. When you invoke the function's name down here in the main part of the program, so when I say main part, I mean after the functions have been defined. So when you invoke the function down here, Python is gonna hop up here and be like, wait, now what am I supposed to do? Oh, he's telling me to print those three things. So it prints those three things. So in this video, I'm only showing you printing functions. That's how we're going to start. So there are, of course, many functions you can make. They don't have to print anything if you don't want them to. You control what the functions do. But anyway, for this video, we're focusing on functions that print. And now you can invoke this function as many times as you want. So if I invoke it twice, it just runs that code twice. So if for whatever reason I was building a function where I wanted this stuff printed multiple times, I wouldn't want to have to do this. I wouldn't have to like, oh no, don't print it, no. So, if I wanted that stuff printed twice, here's one way of doing it, right? I could just like write it out, but that kind of repetition seems kind of silly. So instead of just like copying and pasting a bunch of code, if I want to run the same code multiple times, like here, if I want to run it 3 times, just save the code somewhere else, give it a name, and then call on it when you want. So now I've run that function 3 times. Okay, so again, this function is like not exciting. It prints these 3 sort of unrelated lines. Why would you do this? But don't focus on that. Just focus on the structure. I define it by giving it a name. I decide what I'm going to feed into it. In this case, I fed nothing into it. And then I told it what to do when I invoke its name. So there's our first function, printHello. You do need the empty parentheses. All functions have at least the potential for inputs. The inputs go in the parentheses. Okay, so now here's the one that we feed something into it. So this function is called printInTimes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed it a phrase, so like an English string, and I'm going to feed it a number. And then what it's going to do is, for k in range n, it's going to run a for loop n times, and it's going to print that phrase n times. So when I feed a phrase into it, it just prints it how many times I tell it to. So this kind of for loop we've seen many times. Now I'm just like kind of banking it and telling Python like, hey, look, save this for later. And whenever I want you to run that, I'm going to use the name printInTimes, and I'll feed in my string and feed in my number. So if you consider this 4th line of the program here, printInTimes, see how I feed it like a function is input output. So I'm feeding in an input of the string hi there, and I'm feeding in the number 6. And what Python will do is it will take this hi there and it will like copy and paste it on top of phrase. So phrase is a variable that lives in memory on the computer. What you're going to do is you're going to fill that piece of memory with the phrase hi there. And you're going to fill this in value with 6. So these little inputs here, they're like vessels waiting to be filled, where you decide what's going to fill them. So for right now, I'm deciding I'm going to feed in this string. So phrase will literally become hi there, and in will become 6. So then the function is going to do for k in range 6, and it's going to print phrase, which is hi there. You can feed in other things if you want to. So here, I created a string called myString, gave it value class, and now I can feed that into the function. MyString has value class, and then basically class just gets passed on to phrase. So phrase takes on that value, n takes on value 3, and it prints that. I call the function twice. So it says hi there 6 times, and then it says class 3 times. So here's an example of a function with inputs. You can feed things into it. You can feed it an English phrase, and also you feed it a number so that it knows how many times to print that thing that you're feeding it. Okay, so again, when you have inputs like this, these are just like empty variables waiting for you to tell them what they should be. So in this example, I told it that I wanted phrase to be hi there and n to be 6. And then later I told it I wanted phrase to have the value of myString, which is class, and 3. And the order here matters. So if I go like this, like that, it doesn't know what you're talking about anymore because it's expecting you to give it an English phrase and then a number, and you didn't do that. You gave it a number, and it's like, what? That's not a string. And then you gave it an English string when it was expecting a number. You can't feed a string into that n value right there. For k in range hi there, what does that mean? Right? Python's very confused. In fact, that's exactly what it's saying. It's like, you told me to do for k in range n, but n, the way you handed it to me, right, there's n, that's a string. And how am I supposed to do for k in range not number? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so there's an example of a function with 2 inputs. And you can set up functions however you feel like. You can give it 30 inputs. You can give it no inputs. Right here, I didn't feed it anything. I just said, hey, when I invoke this name, just like print these things. Those are fixed values, right? Print hello. So here, depending on what I feed the function, it'll print different things. It'll print different phrases, and it will print them a different number of times. Okay, here's another example just showing you what you can feed in, and you can put anything you want inside of functions. So back in the slides, it said code right here. That code can be anything. So here's an example of code with a while loop. And so this function, I'm just feeding in a number. So that's a 10 or 5 or whatever. And then what I do is I create another number variable that has value x. So numVar takes on the value of 5. And then what this says is, as long as numVar is bigger than 0, I'm going to print that value, bottles of beer on the wall, print that value again, bottles of beer. Take one down, pass it around, and now we have one fewer bottle, don't we? Bottles of beer on the wall. And then I'm going to decrease the number of numVar. So if numVar started at 10, it becomes 9, then it becomes 8, 7, so on, and it keeps going until it's done. So let's see what this prints. It says 5 bottles of beer on the wall, take one down, pass it around, 4 bottles of beer on the wall, and then it restarts. Okay. Now it hops back to the top of the loop. So it was 5. So just to be clear what happens here, I fed 5 in. So therefore, x takes on the value of 5. I then pass that value on to numVar. You don't have to do it like this, but I like having this separate name here. Anyway, and then it just prints these 4 lines as long as the loop runs, decreases the number of runs by 1. And I think eventually it terminates at 0, right? Once we reach 0, it stops. Okay, and you can also, like, I don't know. I don't remember how this song actually ends. Whatever. So you feed in 5. Once the loop is done running, it says song is over. Okay, so anyway, you can create a function to print the lyrics of a very obnoxious song. So I don't want to keep, 99 is the number people usually do, but whatever, you can have it do 10, 9 bottles of beer, right? Take one down. Okay, so anyway, so this function exists to print the lyrics of 99 bottles of beer on the wall, where it doesn't have to be 99. You can start the song wherever you feel like, and then it just prints the song lyrics for you, and then tells you when it's done. So there you go. You can have only two. That's a nice short song. Okay, so again, just focus on the structure, what's happening here. I defined a function called print X bottles of beer, capital X. You do have to respect the everything, right? The punctuation, whatever. So if I do like this, Python says, what do you mean print lowercase x bottles of beer? I don't know what you're talking about. And you say, oh, what if it's a capital X? And Python says, oh yeah. You have to be very literal with the computer. And then you feed in some value, and now it just does this code. It does whatever you told it to do. Okay. So a couple more, 3 more, something like that. Just again, emphasizing that you can feed in whatever you want, print whatever you want. So this function is, I'm calling it print divisors. I feed in a number, and then here's what the function does. It creates a for loop that starts at 1 and goes through whatever number you fed it. It goes through that number because number plus 1 is here. And then it says if number percentage k is 0. So we've seen this kind of thing plenty of times now. What this is saying is that if k is a divisor of number, or if you like, if number is a multiple of k, then it's going to print that k value. So it's printing the divisors. So I can feed in a 10. I say, hey, print divisors with a 10. So then number takes on the value 10. So this becomes for k in range 1 to 11. And it will just check for values of 10. And then just to emphasize here, you can also have a variable you feed in, just like in previous examples. If x is 15, print the divisors of 15. Oops. Very literal Python, right? Divisors. Okay, so here are the divisors of 10. 1, 2, 5, and 10. Here are the divisors of 15. 1, 3, 5, and 15. If this is prime, it should just print one in itself. Okay. So, if you're dealing with a program that cares about prime numbers or divisors, and that doesn't sound as abstract as it might sound, actually. A lot of cryptography applications are based on prime numbers, like encrypting your credit card information and things like this. But anyway, maybe you care about like somehow seeing or recording the divisors of a number. You don't want to write this same 3 lines a bunch of times. Just write them once and then call on this function whenever you feel like, and you can feed a number into the function. Okay, 2 more examples. This function is called print evens, and now notice I fed a list in. You can do that. You can feed in pretty much any sort of data type you want into a function. You can feed in a dictionary if you want to, whatever. And here it's just saying for item in my list, if the item is even, then I'll print it. So here's a list. List 1 is whatever this is, 465. If I feed that list 1 into the function, then I'm tipping like this value. I'm tipping it into my list so that my list takes on. It has the value 465 whatever, and then it'll print the even numbers in that list. So 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 2. There you go. Okay, one last one. I feed it a phrase, and if the phrase does not end in an exclamation mark, then I make it enthusiastic. So here's an example like that. Oops. You always have to include a colon after you define. Okay. So I didn't feed it something enthusiastic, so it checked that and printed this. If I fed it something enthusiastic, it's not going to print anything because there's no else. If you wanted it to also print something else, you would say, I don't know, appropriate enthusiasm. Okay. So that's the idea of a function. You put your functions. So far, my examples have only had one function, but you can put as many functions up here as you want. So let me just show you that real quick. You put your functions at the top of the code, and then Python just is like it banks them. It's like, oh, I see. he created a function called print hello. If he ever calls on that, I'm going to print those three things. He created a function called print enthusiasm that takes as input a string. If he ever calls on that, I'll do this stuff here, this if else, whatever. So here I can have as many functions as I want. I can use as many as I want, as many times as I want. Python is still reading from top to bottom. So once you bank these functions, now it starts here kind of proper and says, oh, okay, string is hello class. I feed that string into print enthusiasm and do that. And then next I do this. It just works its way from top to bottom, and then it just keeps going. So I'm just going to type some nonsense here. And then you ask it, hey, if 4 is even, print 1. So it does. It's still reading from top to bottom. But it's only going to do these functions if you call on them. So if I take this out, print hello, it's not going to print hello 5 David because you didn't call on it. This is just banked. So just put away for now in the drawer or something, right? The way you bring it out of the drawer is to actually invoke it down below. Okay, so that's an introduction to functions. You can feed things in and then it does stuff. These functions are all, like I said, printing functions. They exist to be handed things and then they print something. Most functions that we'll deal with don't do any printing. Instead of printing things, they kind of like see your input and then they toss something back to you. So they give you an output, like a function in a pre-calculus class or something, input, output. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time. But this is still a good intro because it gets you comfortable with the structure of like DEF, give it a name, think about what you're going to feed to it, and then have the function do some stuff. And then invoke it down below. That's how functions are constructed, and that's how you call on them. So that's it for this intro. This is actually, I should have said at the very beginning, this is chapter 3 now. We're finally back at the beginning of the book. We skipped over it because I don't like covering functions so early in the class. I think it's confusing. And when I say I think, what I'm saying is previous students have thought. Previous students don't like starting with functions in week 2 or whatever. But now that we've gotten loops and stuff under our belt, hopefully this is more approachable. If you have any questions or anything, please let me know.